Hello everybody, welcome to Zion Mountain Ranch. We are here for our 2025 eMTB Shootout. This is our full power group bike test, and we are really excited to talk today about the Norco Sight VLT. So before we dive into the details, we'd like to thank the sponsors who helped make this shootout of these 12 awesome bikes possible. Without the support of Fox Racing and Schwalbe Tires, as well as Velocirax, we would not be able to come out here, spend all these days, and test all these bikes. So thanks to Fox for keeping us looking good and protected with all their protective apparel, as well as Schwalbe. We opted to run the Albert Gravity Radial tires out back and the Mary Gravity radials up front. Of course, Velocirax also helped us transport the bikes to all of our destinations, so thanks Velocirax. And thanks to Zion Mountain Ranch for keeping us well fed and seeing beautiful views out of this awesome cabin. So let's get into the bike. On test here, we've got the VLT CX C1 model bike. Now it has the Bosch Gen 5 drive unit. About halfway through the shootout, we got the updated power, I guess you could say, on the drive unit, and it was a pretty notable difference. We'll talk about that a little more in the roundtable. Sean, why don't you run us through the specs on the C1?
Oh, I think I can do that for you. So as he said, we have the C1, comes in at $9,999. It is a mullet only bike. It comes with powering our Gen 5 Bosch unit is a integrated 800 watt hour battery. It is not removable. Easily. If you got half an hour lying around, you might be able to get it out of there. If 800 watt hours is not enough for you, you can get the Bosch PowerMore 250. Gives you probably another hour or so worth of range. Moving into the suspension spec, we've got a Lyric Ultimate up front. We've got a Super Deluxe Ultimate out back. Crank Brothers carbon wheels, and our favorite SRAM Maven brakes.
Well, you know, I think these ones actually held up. They were not very problematic, were they?
We haven't had to bleed these ones yet.
Yeah, correct, or massage them.
Or massage
them, which is
thankfully.
Usually, I guess, what they call for. But yeah, no, these actually, I think, are maybe one of the very few that have not been any problems. So this might polarize some folks. We all opted for the size 3. We all also really wish Norco offered a size 3.5, 3 plus, 4 minus, whatever you want to call it. But I'm 5'11", so I'm the short guy in the group. Everyone else is like 6'2 to 6'3". However, based on their dimensions and their riding styles, would you have gone up to a size 4?
Nope.
Okay, Sean, I know you like short bikes. Robert also, he says he's got the legs of a 6'6" man and the torso of a 5'6" man or something along those lines. So he likes a shorter reach as well. So yeah, all of us, we kind of like a shorter, more playful bike. The weight of an e-bike. Speaking of weight, this thing comes in at 49.6 with the 800 and our gravity casing tires. So yeah, I do think we would have liked a little longer, a mid reach, but we'll get into that in the ride impressions. Other key geo numbers would include 77.5 effective seat tube angle, 64 degree head tube angle. The wheelbase overall is 1,255 millimeters, in part due to the 436 millimeter chain stays. The reach at 472.5. The stack height on this bike is 636 mils. So overall, I'd say for what this size 3 is, I'd say pretty neutral numbers for the most part, especially for a 150, 160 bike. The chainstays are not the same size across the range. They do change with all the sizes. Norco puts a lot of time, effort, energy, aka dollars, invested into their ride aligned and geometry system, from both suspension setup to weight distribution, balance, and general dimensions of the bike. So I think, you know, even though the sizes don't quite fit us right in our 5'11" to 6'2" range for our desired feel, it's nice to see the effort and energy they put into all the other aspects of the bike.
I would like to start out back. So Ride Align, I believe, called for 186 PSI in the shock for my weight.
Which is?
170 pounds with gear.
Okay.
I actually ended up at 230 PSI in that rear shock at 30% sag, and I countered that with using 2 shock pumps to make sure that I was getting an accurate reading, and that sag figure stayed true at both ratings for the weight. And that to me seemed a little wild because the fork up front, I was only 6 psi over what Ride-A-Line said, which for Ride-A-Line is pretty consistent for my riding style.
Other setup things that you liked or took time moving away from suspension? General like feelings of the bike, getting it powered up for the first time, getting comfortable?
I mean, it's all pretty standard, I think. Just threw everything on. I got the stack where I wanted it with the headset spacers. I mean, really, that's the only option that you can really mess with aside from seat post height, which the seat post insertion depth on this bike is quite impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got some long leg guys on there for sure. So okay.
I did play with stack on my race run. I went up and then went down a little bit in the fork just to try and get some weight out back, which we will talk about, of course, in the riding impressions as well.
Okay. Climbing, Sean, your least favorite thing typically.
This was my favorite bike to climb.
Okay.
At least on the tighter, more technical switchbacks. Just kind of was able to lean the bike over, zip around, pick the front wheel up, and just kind of wheelie around without feeling too out of control. And I felt like I was in a pretty solid climbing position as well, all things considered. I think the short reach kind of put me in a good climbing position, though it has its side effects for descending.
Sure.
But I mean, yeah, overall it was...
Also has longer cranks than a lot of the other bikes. So.
It did. So despite it being my favorite bike to climb, it is the only bike that I bashed cranks on 2 or 3 times on my rather fast approach going up the hill.
Yeah, this has 165 cranks, and a lot of the other bikes are 160, even down to 150 mil. So that's something that would have been nice to see, in my opinion.
For me, it gave me a really I was trying to understanding what you're saying, and it gave me a really powerful climbing position because the reach was a little shorter. That weight distribution happened a lot quicker. So when you were pulling up around some of those sharp corners, getting that front wheel off and then getting on the power sooner was a lot easier than some of the other bikes with a little bit longer reach. And I also found the drawbacks to that shorter reach rather in certain scenarios going down. But as far as going uphill, I think having that high pivot and in your mind knowing that you have that there, that you can just like mash up through rocks as long as you don't hit the cranks, is a pretty cool feeling and definitely aids in traction when climbing.
For the first time. Whoa! Oh, it is loose out here.
So I got my fastest time initially on the Micro DH with this bike.
Okay.
And even though I wasn't overly comfortable in a comfortable position downhilling, like I felt like I was more over the bars than I wanted to be, just because I feel like the stack for my 6'2" stature standing was just a little too low. But overall, it still didn't slow me down at all. And even with the 800 watt-hour battery and its lightweight stature, like it was easy to pick up, pop, and play with it. But it's just, I mean, it was a fun bike overall, I think.
Okay. Cool.
It definitely rides lighter than the number on paper.
Yeah.
And for me, it was my second fastest, and also was not the most confident at that speed. Like I feel with that little bit shorter bike and the 27.5 wheel out back, that my weight transfer made a much bigger difference. So if I was a little bit too far forward coming into a corner, I'd unweight the rear and it would step out. And testament to these tires that when it steps out, it does have traction. I've experienced that on all the bikes. But for how fun and playful and agile it is, it can go fast if you really want to try and put more effort into it. And it's more of a mental game of staying on your perfect riding position and perfect posture. But at speed on some bigger hits, it felt, I wasn't bottoming, but I felt like I was hitting a wall. And I don't know if that was a damping tune on the shock and my weight not working well together. I know Robert didn't have that same feeling, whereas we experienced that same feeling, and maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit more as well.
What I felt was pretty similar, 190 pounds plus or minus, and I found that the bike, it really performed well in terms of suspension. Like I rode it quite a bit up in Oregon, and when I rode it on softer dirt, in kind of rooty stuff, I was just like, this thing is awesome. Like, it did a great job, hit some flow jump trails, and this thing is so springy and lively. I definitely overshot some step ups to flat because I was just like, whoa, like that thing just sent right over the landing.
Which is usually not what you would associate a high pivot bike with.
Not usually correct, especially not, you know, I mean, this is a pretty light one. It's one of the lighter bikes at 49 pounds, but still, you don't think about a 49-pound high pivot bike being a bike that you easily overjump landings. And I saw you do that today pretty deep. So the bike is a fun bike. The suspension works well. Where I sort of, you know, struggled a little bit with the suspension was on really hard packed trails, maybe with braking bumps, or landing large impacts, again, on hard surfaces. I just felt like I would kind of go through the travel and then it would just kind of get into this just like hard, dead, like jumping into wet cement feeling. Like I would just go down and be there. Yep. And it just wasn't, it was very opposite of how lively and active and springy it felt when I was jumping or hitting like some of the other trails. So I don't know, like you said, you brought up the hydraulic bottom out is not tunable on this particular shock. Maybe Robert's a little heavier. He's, you know, certainly a bit faster and can send it a bit harder. So maybe he's pushing through and it's working for him. But something that I think I would say is a takeaway for me at 5'11", I wish it was just a few millimeters longer, right? What is the reach on this thing? 472.5. If it was, you know, 5 to 7 mils longer, that would be pretty sweet. Because on really, really steep loamers that we were riding on up in Oregon, I found myself kind of getting a little nervous. And I don't know entirely if it was the lyric or the reach, but I just kind of found myself struggling on the really steep stuff, which admittedly probably was over the head of a 150, 160 bike. But, you know, I think there's other bikes in the category that probably wouldn't have felt quite so skittish on the same terrain. Where does this bike shine, and who would you say is the ideal consumer?
I would say an everyday trail user that doesn't necessarily want to bash the gnarliest stuff because the bike can be easily overridden. Flow trails, riders that like to spend more time on loamers and rooty trails. And, I mean, it's overall, it works everywhere.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I'd add to that someone that wants to play, because it is very active and lively, and it wants you to pull for those little root gaps and pump and manual and do just fun shenanigans on it, right? Like, it's not, looking at it, you're like, oh man, that's gonna be like the Rock Masher. And while it can do that, I think it really shines when you're just out for a good time.
Yeah.
Or, if you want to go for a long epic with that 800 watt-hour battery.
Yeah, no,
For sure. Yeah, so I reviewed the non-electrified version of this bike, and I absolutely loved it, right? I still do. Like, it is an awesome bike. And this thing sort of kept in line with a lot of those elements, barring like that little bit of suspension issue that I had it kind of hitting at the end of stroke there. But for the most part, I think this doesn't need overly gnarly terrain, mellower gradient flow trails, a little bit of rocky, chunky stuff, some rooty stuff. The bike overall is at home just about anywhere you put it. It's a comfortable bike. The suspension platform is quite supple, so if you are a seated climber, you know, that thing is just, it's, you know, maybe with seat replacement, you'll be able to sit and grind out some big miles on this thing, turn around and have a blast going down. And it's, like you said, quite jumpy and playful. So I think it's a solid bike all around. And
it's what a trail bike should be.
Yeah, it is a very solid, do-it-all e-bike, like trail bike for sure. So, all right, folks, there you have it, the Norco Sight VLT CX. Stay tuned for all the other episodes in our Shootout series. Thanks again to Fox Racing, Schwalbe Tires, Velocirax, and Zion Mountain Ranch.